The ceremonial halls of Velshari Prime stretched endlessly in crystalline magnificence, their walls catching and fracturing the light of 3 suns into cascades of rainbow fire. Lady Thalane Veshtar stood at the center of the grand reception chamber, her pale blue skin luminescent against the flowing white and gold of her ceremonial robes. Golden curls framed her face like a crown, each strand catching the prismatic light as she moved with practiced grace. Among the assembled delegates, she was beautiful in the way that legends spoke of, untouchable, ethereal, a living embodiment of her people's most sacred traditions. At 23 cycles, she had already refused the courtship of 17 noble houses, 3 planetary governors, and 1 war hero whose conquests had expanded the empire by 12 systems. Each refusal had only added to her mystique, cementing her reputation as the untaken star, pure, perfect, and forever beyond reach. The human delegation had arrived that morning, their ship a crude but functional vessel that looked almost primitive. Next to the elegant curves of Velshari architecture, most of her people viewed humans with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. They were young as a species, crude in their mannerisms, and utterly lacking in the refined sensibilities that had made the Velshari Empire the cultural jewel of the galaxy. Thalane had expected more of the same tired diplomatic dance, flowery speeches, veiled threats disguised as trade proposals, and the inevitable awkward attempts at courtship that seemed to follow her wherever she went. What she hadn't expected was Elias Monroe. He stood slightly apart from the other human delegates, neither the tallest nor the most commanding presence in the room. His dark hair was simply styled, his formal diplomatic attire well-tailored but unremarkable. When Ambassador Hawthorne introduced him as their cultural liaison and translator, Thalane barely spared him a glance. Another functionary, another face in the endless parade of those who sought audience with the imperial court. But then he spoke. "Your Radiance," he said, his voice carrying the careful inflection of someone who had spent considerable time learning not just her language, but the nuances of respect embedded within it. "I am honored by your presence, and I hope that our peoples might find understanding in the spaces between our words." It was the phrasing that caught her attention, formal enough to show proper respect, but with an underlying poetry that suggested genuine appreciation for Velshari literary tradition. When she looked at him again, she found him waiting patiently for her response, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression attentive but not expectant. "You speak our tongue with uncommon grace, Translator Monroe," she replied, using the formal tones reserved for diplomatic exchanges. "From where did you acquire such fluency?" A slight smile touched the corners of his mouth. "From your people's poetry, Your Radiance. I found that to truly understand a language, one must first understand how it sings." The answer surprised her. Most humans who learned Velshari did so through military or trade channels, acquiring just enough vocabulary to conduct business. Poetry was considered the highest form of their cultural expression, complex and layered with meaning that could take decades to fully appreciate. "And which of our poets have you studied?" she asked, genuine curiosity creeping into her voice. "Danval Murthy's speaks to me most clearly," he replied without hesitation. "Her verses on the nature of waiting, of patience as a form of devotion, they remind me that some things are worth the time they require to fully appreciate." Thalane felt something flutter in her chest, a recognition she couldn't quite name. Danval Murthy's was her own favorite poet, a writer whose work explored themes of longing and restraint that resonated deeply with her own circumstances. That this human had not only read her work but understood its deeper meanings was unexpected. "A wise choice," she said softly, "though I wonder if you truly understand what she meant by waiting as devotion." Elias met her gaze steadily. "Perhaps not entirely, Your Radiance, but I believe I understand enough to know that some things, some people deserve to be approached with patience rather than presumption." The conversation that followed was unlike any she had experienced with an off-world delegate. Where others spoke of trade agreements and military alliances, Elias asked about their cultural festivals, their art, their history. He listened to her answers with genuine interest, asking thoughtful follow-up questions that demonstrated not just politeness, but real engagement with her people's traditions. As the formal reception wound down and the delegates began to disperse. Thalane found herself walking with Elias toward the palace gardens. The other humans had already departed, but he seemed in no hurry to leave. "Will you be staying long on Velshari Prime?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. 3 more days, Your Radiance. Long enough to complete the cultural exchange protocols, but not so long as to overstay our welcome. And then I return to my duties among the outer colonies. There are always more languages to learn, more cultures to understand. She nodded, understanding filling her. He was not here to conquer or claim, not here to add her to some collection of trophies. He was simply here to learn, to understand, to appreciate something beautiful without needing to possess it. As they parted ways that evening, Thalane realized she had found something. She hadn't even known she was looking for someone who could see her not as a symbol or a prize, but as a person worth knowing, worth understanding, worth waiting for. The thought followed her into sleep, where she dreamed of patient hands and gentle voices, and poetry that sang of devotion measured not in conquest, but in the space between heartbeats, in the quiet understanding that some things were worth waiting for. 3 years had passed since the human delegation departed Velshari Prime, yet Thalane found herself thinking of Elias Monroe with increasing frequency. Their correspondence had begun formally diplomatic missives about cultural exchange, programs, and trade protocols, but gradually their letters had evolved into something more personal, more intimate. He would write about the colonies he visited, the languages he was learning, the small moments of beauty he discovered in far-flung worlds. She would respond with observations about court life, fragments of new poetry she'd discovered, and carefully worded questions about his travels. The imperial court had grown increasingly insistent about her marriage prospects. Her mother, Empress Velana, summoned her to the throne room on a crisp morning when the 3 suns aligned to cast the palace in brilliant silver light. "Daughter, you cannot remain untouched forever," the Empress said, her own pale blue skin seeming to glow with accumulated wisdom and authority. "The House of Merdena has made a generous offer. Their eldest son conquered the Kepler expanse and brings glory to our empire. He would make a suitable consort." Thalane knelt before the crystalline throne, her golden curls catching the filtered light. "Mother, I understand the political necessity, but my heart, your heart." Velana's voice carried a note of sharp surprise. "What does your heart know of ruling an empire? You are the untaken star, pure and perfect, a symbol of our people's highest ideals. Your marriage must serve the greater good, and if my heart belongs elsewhere." The silence that followed was deafening. Thalane had never spoken so boldly before, never dared to challenge the expectations that had shaped her entire existence. The Empress descended from her throne, her movements graceful and predatory. "Tell me," Velana said softly, dangerously, "where does the heart of the untaken star allegedly belong?" Thalane's hands trembled as she reached into her robes and withdrew a small communication device, the one she used for her private correspondence with Elias. "There's a human, a translator. He served with the delegation 3 years ago." The Empress's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching horror. "A human? You would throw away millennia of tradition, the purity of our bloodline, for a human? He sees me, mother, not the symbol, not the prize, not the political alliance. He sees me as I am, and he asks for nothing in return." Velana struck her. Then, a sharp blow that sent Thalane sprawling across the polished floor. "You will not speak such blasphemy in my presence again. You will accept the proposal from House Merdena, and you will forget this infatuation with the human." That night, alone in her chambers, Thalane composed what she thought might be her final letter to Elias. She wrote of duty and obligation, of the crushing weight of expectations she could no longer bear. She told him about the forced engagement, about her mother's rage, about the suffocating certainty that she would spend the rest of her life as a beautiful ornament in someone else's collection. His reply came 2 weeks later, and it changed everything. "My dearest Thalane," he wrote, "I have waited 3 years for courage I may never possess, and now I fear I may have waited too long. You write of duty and obligation as though they are chains you cannot break, but I have seen your strength, your intelligence, your capacity for independent thought. You are not an ornament to be possessed. You are a person with the right to choose your own destiny. I will not presume to offer you salvation or rescue, because you need neither. But I will offer you something else, a place where you can be simply yourself, without titles or expectations or the weight of an empire's traditions. I have taken a permanent position on Kepler-4 for to be a small colony world where no one knows of, the untaken star where you could be simply Thalane. I do not ask you to come to me. I only ask that you know the choice exists. Should you ever choose to take it, I will be here, waiting, as I have always waited, not because I expect anything from you, but because some things are worth the time they require. With all my love and respect, Elias. Thalane read the letter a dozen times, memorizing every word, every subtle inflection. He offered her something no one else ever had, not marriage or alliance or the promise of power, but simply the freedom to be herself. The engagement ceremony to the heir of House Merdena was scheduled for the following month. He was handsome in the classical Velshari manner, his pale blue skin unmarked by scars, his silver hair styled in the elaborate braids that denoted his military rank. When he spoke to her, it was with the confident assumption that she should be grateful for his attention. You are even more beautiful than the stories claimed, he said during their first formal meeting. I looked forward to adding you to my household. You will bear strong children and bring honor to both our houses, adding her to his household, as though she were a piece of art to be collected, a broodmare to be acquired. Thalane smiled and nodded, and said all the appropriate things, but inside, her heart was already making its choice. 3 days before the engagement ceremony, she made her decision. In the dark hours before dawn, when the palace guards changed shifts and the corridors were empty, Thalane made her way to the royal hangar. Her personal transport, a small, fast ship designed for ceremonial flights, waited in the shadows. She had been planning this moment for weeks, studying guard rotations, memorizing flight paths, calculating jump coordinates. Her hands shook as she powered up the engines, but her resolve never wavered. As Velshari Prime fell away behind her, Thalane felt something she had never experienced before, the exhilarating terror of complete freedom. She was no longer the untaken star, no longer a symbol or a prize. She was simply a woman in love, flying toward the only person who had ever seen her as she truly was. The journey to Kepler-4 for to be would take 3 days. Behind her, she knew, the alarm had already been raised. Imperial ships would be dispatched. Her mother would rage. The political implications would ripple through the empire like shockwaves. But ahead of her, somewhere in the vast darkness of space, Elias Monroe was waiting, not because he expected her to come, but because he had promised he would be there if she chose to find him. And for the first time in her life, Thalane had made a choice that was entirely her own. The pursuit began 12 hours after Thalane's escape from Velshari Prime. The first ship to intercept her was the Mirthalis Vengeance, a sleek imperial cruiser commanded by Captain Vulturine, one of her mother's most trusted officers. His voice crackled through her communication system as she navigated the treacherous asteroid field. Near the Vega Nebula, Lady Thalane, by order of Empress Valana, you will power down your engines and prepare to be taken aboard. Your engagement ceremony will proceed as scheduled. Thalane's fingers flew over the controls of her small transport, weaving between the massive chunks of rock and ice that littered this remote sector of space. She had chosen this route precisely because larger ships would struggle to follow her through the narrow passages. "Captain," she replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins, "I respectfully decline your invitation." The Vengeance fired a warning shot that superheated a nearby asteroid into glowing slag. "This is not a request, Your Radiance. You are the property of the Empire, and you will return to fulfill your duties." Property. The word struck her like a physical blow, confirming everything she had begun to understand about her place in the Imperial hierarchy. But instead of breaking her resolve, it strengthened it. She was no one's property, not her mother's, not her betrothed's, not the Empire's. "Then you'll have to catch me first," she whispered, and pushed her engines to maximum burn. What followed was the most harrowing 18 hours of her life. 2 more Imperial ships joined the pursuit as she fled through hyperspace, their larger vessels gradually closing the distance despite her head start. She jumped from system to system, using every trick of navigation she had learned during her ceremonial flights, pushing her small ship far beyond its recommended operational limits. The final confrontation came at the edge of human space, where the jurisdiction of the Velshari Empire began to blur into the territory of younger, scrappier civilizations. The Imperial ships had cornered her in the gravity well of a dying red giant, their combined firepower more than enough to disable her transport without causing fatal damage. Lady Thalane, came a new voice, her betrothed, heir to House Merdena, speaking from the command deck of his personal dreadnought. This rebellion ends now. You will submit to Imperial will and accept your place in the natural order. Thalane stared at the tactical display, watching the 3 massive ships arrange themselves in a perfect containment formation. Her fuel reserves were nearly exhausted, her engines overheating, her options seemingly non-existent. But as she prepared to power down her weapons and surrender to the inevitable, another voice cut through the communication channel. This is Captain Rodriguez of the Terran Colonial Defense Force. You are in violation of human territorial sovereignty. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. A human warship smaller than the Imperial vessels, but bristling with railguns and missile pods, emerged from the shadow of the red giant. Behind it came Demore, their hulls scarred by countless battles, their crews undoubtedly outnumbered, but clearly unbowed. Human Captain, the heir's voice carried cold amusement. You are vastly outgunned. Stand aside, and no harm will come to your ships. See, that's where you're wrong, Rodriguez replied, and Thalane could hear the grin in his voice. We might be outgunned, but we're definitely not outclassed. And that woman you're chasing, she's requested political asylum in human space. We take that kind of thing seriously. The battle that followed was brief but intense. The human ships attacked with a ferocity that caught the Imperial forces off guard, their smaller size and superior maneuverability allowing them to strike and fade before the heavier Velshari weapons could lock on. In the chaos, Thalane's transport slipped through the containment grid and fled toward Kepler 4 as she entered the final approach to the colony world. Her hands trembling with exhaustion and relief, Thalane allowed herself to think about what came next. Somewhere on the planet below, Elias was going about his daily routine, probably unaware that the woman he had waited for was finally coming home. The landing pad he had described in his letters was exactly where he said it would be, a simple metal platform on the outskirts of New Geneva, the colony's main settlement. Her ship touched down just as the local sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. She sat in the cockpit for several minutes, suddenly uncertain. What if he had changed his mind? What if 3 years of letters had been nothing more than diplomatic courtesy? What if she had thrown away everything she had ever known for a dream that existed only in her own imagination? Then she saw him walking across the landing pad, and all her doubts evaporated like morning mist. Elias looked older than she remembered, lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent under alien suns, gray threading through his dark hair. But his smile was exactly the same, warm and patient, and completely without presumption. He stopped a respectful distance from her ship and waited, hands clasped behind his back, giving her the space to make the next move. Thalane took a deep breath, opened the hatch, and stepped out into the cool evening air of her new world. She was still wearing her ceremonial robes, the white and gold fabric now wrinkled and stained from her desperate journey. Her golden curls were disheveled, her pale blue skin marked with the stress of her escape. She had never felt more beautiful. "Hello, Elias," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Hello, Thalane," he replied, and the way he said her name, not Your Radiance or Lady Thalane, but simply her name, spoken with quiet reverence, made her heart soar. "They offered me empires," she said, walking slowly toward him, "palaces and titles and the honor of bearing the next generation of imperial heirs. They offered me everything a woman of my station could possibly want." Elias nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. "And what did you choose?" She stopped just in front of him, close enough to see the emotions playing across his features, hope and fear. and wonder all mixed together. "I chose you," she said simply. "I chose the man who offered me nothing but the freedom to be myself." And somehow, that was everything. In the distance, she could see the lights of Imperial ships entering the system, her pursuers finally catching up after the delay at the border. But for now, in this moment, she was exactly where she belonged, standing face to face with the only person who had ever truly seen her, ready to discover what came next. Elias led her to his home, a modest dwelling of local stone and timber that sat on a hillside overlooking the valley where New Geneva spread like scattered stars. It was nothing like the crystal palaces of Velshari Prime, but as Thalane stepped across the threshold, she felt something she had never experienced in all her years of imperial luxury: peace. "It's not much," Elias said, suddenly seeming uncertain as he watched her take in the simple furnishings. The bookshelves lined with texts in a dozen languages, the wide windows that looked out over the colony's rolling hills. "It's perfect," she replied, meaning it completely. Here were no servants hovering at her elbow, no protocol officers monitoring her every word, no cameras recording her movements for imperial broadcasts. Here, she could simply be. But their respite was brief. Within hours, the first imperial ships appeared in the night sky, their searchlights sweeping across the countryside as they sought any sign of her transport. Elias had hidden her ship in a cave system in the nearby mountains, but they both knew it was only a matter of time before the search parties found them. "They'll never stop looking," Thalane said as they watched the lights from his living room window. "My mother will see this as a personal betrayal, and my betrothed, he will not accept being denied what he considers rightfully his." Elias moved to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Then we'll face them together. The colonial government has already granted you asylum, and the Terran Defense Force won't abandon you to Imperial justice." She turned to look at him, studying his face in the soft light from the window. "You could have lived a quiet life here, peaceful, safe. Why would you risk everything for someone you barely know?" His hand rose to gently touch her cheek, his fingers tracing the delicate lines of her features. "Because I know you better than you think. 3 years of letters, Thalane. 3 years of watching your thoughts unfold on the page, seeing your heart in every word you wrote. I know your kindness, your intelligence, your strength. I know how you cry when you read sad poetry, and how you laugh when children perform their first ceremonial dances." Her breath caught in her throat. No one had ever spoken to her this way, not as a symbol or a prize, but as a person with thoughts and feelings and dreams of her own. "And I know," he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "that you came here not because you were running from something, but because you were running toward something, toward a life where you could choose your own path." "Elias," she breathed, and then words became unnecessary. He kissed her with the patience he had shown in everything else, gentle at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she had been waiting for this moment longer than she cared to admit, and when she responded, pressing closer to him, she felt years of careful restraint finally beginning to crumble. Their first night together was a revelation. Thalane had been raised to believe that physical intimacy was something to be endured, a duty performed for the good of the Empire. But with Elias, she discovered that love could be an exploration, a conversation conducted in touches and sighs, and whispered ENDEARMENTS. He worshipped her pale blue skin with reverent kisses, his hands tracing the curves of her body as though she were a precious work of art. When she trembled beneath his touch, it was not from fear or obligation, but from desire, a wanting so pure and intense that it left her breathless. "Beautiful," he murmured against her throat, his lips finding the pulse point where her blood sang with need. "So beautiful and finally free." She explored him in return, marveling at the differences between their species, his darker skin warm beneath her palms, the way his body responded to her touch, the sounds he made when she kissed the hollow of his throat. They moved together with increasing urgency. 3 years of longing finally given voice in the language of passion when she took him inside her. When they finally joined completely, Thalane understood for the first time what it meant to choose, not to be chosen, not to be claimed or conquered, but to actively willingly give herself to someone who treasured the gift for what it was. They made love through the night as imperial ships circled overhead, their passion a defiant answer to those who would reduce love to politics and desire to duty. In Elias's arms, Thalane discovered parts of herself she had never known existed: a fierce joy, a wild abandon, a capacity for pleasure that transformed her understanding of what it meant to be alive. As dawn broke over the colony world, they lay entwined in his bed, her golden curls spread across his chest, his fingers combing gently through the silken strands. Outside, the sounds of approaching vehicles told them their time was running short. "They're coming," she said, not moving from the circle of his arms. "I know." His voice was calm, accepting. "Are you afraid?" She considered the question seriously. Yesterday, she would have been terrified of her mother's rage, of the political consequences, of the unknown future that stretched ahead of her. But lying here in the aftermath of their lovemaking, she felt only a deep, abiding certainty. "No," she said finally, "for the first time in my life, I'm not afraid of anything." Elias pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Then we'll face whatever comes next together, as equals, as partners, as lovers," she added, smiling against his skin. "As lovers," he agreed, and held her close as the sound of approaching footsteps echoed on his front porch. The door burst open moments later, admitting a squad of Imperial guards in their ceremonial armor. Behind them came her betrothed, his pale features twisted with fury, and finally her mother, Empress Velana, radiating the cold majesty of absolute power. Thalane rose from the bed without shame, pulling on a simple robe as Elias positioned himself protectively beside her. She had never felt more beautiful or more powerful than she did in that moment, not as the untaken star, but as a woman who had finally learned to take what she wanted. "Mother," she said calmly, inclining her head in the minimal bow required by etiquette. "You've traveled a long way." Velana's eyes blazed with fury and betrayal. "You will return with us immediately. This aberration ends now." Thalane reached for Elias's hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that spoke louder than any words. "I'm exactly where I belong." The confrontation that followed would determine not just their fate, but the future relationship between two great civilizations. But in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of their love, Thalane knew that whatever happened next, she had finally found her home. The throne room of the Imperial Command ship was a masterpiece of crystalline architecture, its walls capturing and refracting light into impossible patterns that seemed to shift and flow like living things. Thalane knelt in the center of the chamber, her hands bound with energy shackles that hummed with barely contained power. Beside her, Elias maintained his dignity despite similar restraints, his presence a source of strength she drew upon with every breath. Empress Velana sat upon the portable crystal throne that had been assembled for this occasion, her pale features carved from disappointment and rage. The heir to House Merdena stood at her right hand, his silver hair gleaming as he glared at the human who had dared to steal his prize. "Do you understand what you have done?" Velana's voice carried the weight of millennia of tradition, of expectations that stretched back to the founding of their empire. "You have shamed our entire people, the untaken star, pure and sacred, defiled by alien touch." Thalane lifted her chin, meeting her mother's gaze without flinching. "I have chosen love over duty, Mother. If that shames you, then perhaps the shame lies not in my choice, but in a system that would deny me the right to make it." A collective gasp rose from the assembled nobles and military officers. Never before had anyone spoken to the Empress with such boldness, such complete rejection of imperial authority. "Love." The heir stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You speak of love as though it were more important than honor, than duty, than the purity of our bloodline. This human has bewitched you, turned you against your own people." "No," Thalane said firmly. "He has shown me who I truly am beneath all the titles and expectations. He has given me the freedom to choose." Velana rose from her throne, her movements sharp with barely controlled fury. "Freedom. You are the daughter of the Empress, heir to the greatest civilization in the galaxy. Your choices affect millions of lives, shape the destiny of entire worlds. Your personal desires are irrelevant, are they?" Thalane struggled to her feet, her bound hands making the movement awkward, but her voice remaining steady. For 26 years, I have been a symbol, a prize, a diplomatic tool. I have smiled and nodded and accepted proposals from men who saw me as a trophy to be won. But I have never been asked what I wanted, never been permitted to dream of a life beyond the role you assigned me. She turned to face the assembled court, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast chamber. I renounce my claim to the throne. I abdicate my position as heir to the empire. I choose to be simply Thalane, not a star, not a symbol, but a woman in love with a man who sees me as I truly am. The silence that followed was deafening. In the entire history of the Velshari Empire, no one of royal blood had ever voluntarily surrendered their position, their power, their place in the cosmic order. The heir recovered first, his face flushing with rage. You cannot simply abandon your responsibilities. The marriage contract between our houses was negotiated without my consent. Thalane interrupted. I was never party to it, never agreed to it. You cannot claim ownership of someone who was never yours to begin with. Enough, Valana's voice cracked like thunder through the chamber. Guards, separate them. The human will be executed for his crimes against the Empire, and my daughter will be taken to the medical bay for purification procedures. Her temporary insanity can be corrected. But as the guards moved forward, something unexpected happened. Captain Velshari, the same officer who had pursued Thalane through space, raised his hand to halt his troops. Your Majesty, he said carefully, his weathered features thoughtful. Perhaps we should consider the precedent we are setting. If we execute this human for the crime of being loved, if we force the Lady Thalane to undergo purification against her will, what message does that send to our people, to the galaxy? Valana's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you questioning my judgment, Captain? I am questioning whether the Empire is served by actions that make us appear tyrannical, rather than noble. He replied, his voice steady despite the risk he was taking. The Lady Thalane speaks of choice, of love, of personal freedom. These are not contemptible desires. They are human, in the best sense of the word. A murmur ran through the assembled court. Thalane could see doubt beginning to creep into the faces around her. Doubt about the wisdom of forcing her return, about the justice of executing Elias, about the entire system that had led to this moment. Furthermore, Captain Velshari continued, the Lady Thalane has formally renounced her position. By our own laws, she is no longer bound by the obligations of royal blood. She is free to choose her own path. The legal advisor whispered urgently in the Empress's ear, his pale features drawn with concern. Thalane watched her mother's expression shift from rage to calculation as the implications became clear. Very well, Valana said finally, her voice brittle with controlled fury. If my daughter chooses to abandon her heritage, her responsibilities, her very identity, then she is no longer my daughter. She will be exiled from Velshari space permanently. Any attempt to return will result in immediate execution. And the human, the heir demanded. The Empress's smile was cold as winter stars. The human may live, if he chooses to accept responsibility for what he has taken from us. He has stolen the untaken star, the living symbol of our people's purity. Let him bear the consequences of that theft for the rest of his life. Elias spoke for the first time since their capture, his voice calm and clear. Your Majesty, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I regret any pain they have caused, but I cannot regret loving Thalane or giving her the choice to love me in return. The energy shackles fell away from their wrists as the guards stepped back. Thalane rushed to Elias's side, taking his hand in hers as they faced the assembled might of the Empire together. So be it, Valana declared. You are both hereby banished from Imperial space. You have chosen each other over duty, over honor, over everything that gives life meaning. May you find satisfaction in your choice when the passion fades and you realize what you have lost. But as they were escorted from the throne room, Thalane felt no regret, no sorrow for what she was leaving behind. She had traded an empire for love, a throne for freedom, certainty for the beautiful unknown of a life lived on her own terms. 6 months later, on a small world at the edge of human space. Thalane and Elias were married in a simple ceremony attended by friends from the colony. She wore a dress of local silk, her golden curls adorned with flowers from his garden. He spoke his vows in perfect Velshari, promising to love and cherish her not as a symbol or a prize, but as the extraordinary woman he had always known her to be. In the years that followed, their love story became legend not just among humans, but throughout the galaxy. The tale of the untaken star, who chose love over duty, inspired countless others to follow. Their hearts rather than their obligations. Some called it the greatest romance in galactic history. Others saw it as the beginning of a new age, where personal freedom mattered as much as political necessity. But to Thalane, it was simply the moment when she stopped being a star and became fully, completely human in all the ways that mattered most. In Elias's arms, under alien constellations, she had found something worth more than any empire, a love that asked for nothing but the freedom to exist, to grow, to become whatever it chose to be, and that, she knew, was everything.